All right, guys, today we're going to take a look at asexual reproduction. So in class, we've been talking about many of the characteristics that living things share. We've done quite a few. We focused on stimulus and response. We did adaptations. We talked about how organisms get their energy from their environment. Now we need to focus on how they reproduce. We mentioned that there's two types. There's asexual and sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction, we said you need two mates, and asexual, you need one. Remember in class, we also talked about a word, typical and atypical. And we said when we put the A in front of a word, it usually means opposite. So in this case, we put the A in front of asexual. It means opposite. So it would be the opposite of sexual reproduction. So with asexual reproduction, let's take a look at a couple things, okay? You only need one mate, okay? And what happens here is the organism will make a copy or a clone. So as a result, you have offspring, which is like a baby, that is identical to the parent organism. So whatever the parent looks like, just trying to fix up the writing here, but whatever the parent looks like, the offspring is going to look like. So these are the major characteristics of asexual reproduction. You only need one mate in order to produce offspring. They make a copy or a clone, and that copy or clone is identical. Everything is exactly the same. Okay? So with that being said, a lot of organisms that reproduce asexually are your single-celled organisms. Okay? There are a few multicellular organisms like some plants and some types of fungi and different types of fungus that do reproduce asexually. So let's move on to sexual reproduction. So we're just let's take a look at sexual reproduction. Okay, this is the other form of reproduction that organisms can go through. Okay, complex organisms such as ourselves reproduce this way. Most multicellular organisms reproduce sexually. Also here, we'll take a look at some of the characteristics. So when we talk about sexual reproduction, you have to have you have to have two parents or two mates. So we know if we relate to ourselves as human beings, in order for us to reproduce, we need to have a mate. And through sexual reproduction, you combine genetic material, or you combine DNA from each parent. So the offspring has DNA from the male and DNA from the female, and they produce a new organism or offspring that is similar. They might have characteristics like, sometimes, hey, my hair color is like the same hair color as my mom, or I have, same facial features as dad. A lot of times you say, oh, I inherited this from my mom. I inherited this particular characteristic from my dad. So what you've done is you've combined your genetic material from each parent. So if we compare this to asexual, you would have, in asexual, it's identical. In sexual reproduction, it's similar. All right, so you're sharing characteristics there. So let's continue. Now we want to take a look at the forward here. This is a binary fission, okay? This is a form of asexual reproduction. And specifically, bacteria, okay? This is how bacteria reproduce. So let's just put this on here. Now, I know this is a smaller image here, but if you see, this is where it starts, okay? So this is the first step. You have one single-celled organism here, all right? What happens is the cell or organism starts to enlarge, all right? Which obviously just means getting bigger. All right, as they progress through the steps, the organism will copy its structures. So it copies its DNA. It copies ribosomes, which is part of the cell. And you can see here, all right, if we look at this guy right here, they're starting to move to each end of the cell. So you see now it's copied its DNA. If you look right here, you can see DNA moving to one side. You see the other copy of the DNA moving to the opposite side of the cell. And what it is it's preparing to split. So when we finally get here, okay, if you can see this last diagram right here, you can see it's starting to pinch off, and you now have two different forms, or two living organisms now, two forms of bacteria that are identical. Okay, identical. All right, so let's continue. Now, moving forward here, this is another form of asexual reproduction. Okay, when you're looking at it, I'm sure you, excuse me, you know what type of organism that is, but if you don't, it is a starfish. Okay, and this is a specific form. We call it regeneration. So we'll just put that up here. All right, we'll call that regeneration. So here, what's happening with regeneration, an organism loses part of its body, or loses a body part, and what happens from there is that body part forms a new organism. So in this case, you can see, if I bring you over here, this part of the starfish, or sea star, when this breaks off, this will form a new organism. So this will break off, and then it will form a new organism. And again, a form of asexual reproduction, because the new organism that is produced is going to be identical to the parent organism. All right, so let's move on here. So again, here's another form of asexual reproduction. Okay, so let's put this guy up here. And what you see here is budding. All right, another type. Okay, another type of asexual reproduction. This organism that we have here is a hydra. Okay, and what happens with budding is part pinches off. Okay, so if we look here, you have in the first diagram right here, you have the hydra. You can see part of the hydra is starting to grow right here. Okay, and you can see it continues to grow here in step 3, and then in step 4, this is where you see the pinch take place. Okay, so this part of the hydra pinches off, and what will happen is it's going to form a new organism that, again, is identical to the parent organism. So what we're going to do now is let's take a look at pros and cons. Okay, we're going to look at, let me erase this. I don't want to put that there. Let's take asexual reproduction first. Okay, So some of the pros is organisms that reproduce asexually are already adapted to their environment. And another pro is that they don't need, or there's no need to find a mate, because they can reproduce on their own. Okay, it makes it easy. It saves a lot of energy. We talked about, organisms expending energy. Not a lot of energy used compared to sexual reproduction with energy when you have to reproduce. Some problems are, let's say, the clone. Sorry, the clone gets sick. That means all organisms are going to get sick. So every new organism that's produced is going to carry on that disease or that sickness. So that could cause some serious problems for that species. And another con is that the reproductive process or reproduction is fast. Right? So you might say, hey, well, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is it could lead to overpopulation. Okay, and we talked about overpopulation and the effects that could have on the environment. So let's move on and let's take a look at the pros and cons of sexual reproduction. Okay, so, and we'll continue as we move throughout the year. We'll continue to touch upon these types of reproduction when we get into different types of organisms. Especially, we'll do viruses and bacteria, and we'll break these down in a little bit more detail, and it'll continue to come up over the course of the year. So when we talk about the pros and cons of sexual reproduction, guys, let's look at some of the pros first. Okay, one pro is it allows for variety. Okay, it allows for variety. It allows for adaptations. All right, so when you have variety, that means you're starting to form new, different organisms that can be stronger. Some of the cons, if I put on this side, I'm going to put some of the cons, is that you have to find a mate. So sometimes some organisms can't find a mate, and if they can't find a mate and they can't reproduce, that could have some dramatic effects on that species population, where they could eventually die out. Also, organisms expend a lot of energy. Okay, with sexual reproduction. Okay, so those are some of the pros and cons of sexual reproduction.